The Nine of Swords is a card of joy, happiness, and winning the lottery.
No, it isn't.
Yes, it is. Joy, joy, happy, happy, joy, joy, happy.
You can deny it all you want, but it doesn't change reality.
I know. Look, this is the one that I've been dreading since I started the whole project. It's gotta be my least favourite card in the tarot. I'll take Death, the Devil, and the Tower all at once over this one. I've heard some people say that the 10 is worse, but I don't go along with that. The 10 has got the sun coming up in the background. The 9 represents the very moment when we're in the absolute midst of pure despair.
Alright, calm down.
And of course it has to be included in the tarot. We've all been there at one time or another, so there's no getting away from it. If it's part of the human condition, then there's got to be a tarot card depicting it. And if nothing else, we can all agree that Pixie has done a very good job of illustrating the concept. Arthur Edward Waite describes the image as one seated on her couch in lamentation, with the swords over her. She is as one who knows no sorrow which is like unto hers. It is a card of utter desolation. Well, the first thing that always sticks out to me is the black background. That's never a good sign. I talked earlier about the Devil and the Tower cards, but the cloak of the figure on the Five of Cups is another example. There's a lot of colour symbolism when it comes to the tarot, and nowhere is that more apparent than on the more negative cards. Pamela Coleman Smith always used the colour black to indicate loss, fear and catastrophe. Rachel Pollack says the image of deepest sorrow, of utmost mental pain, where the Queen frees herself by turning sorrow into wisdom, and the 3 suggests the calm of acceptance, the 9 shows the moment of agony, of dissolution. She also makes a reference to the 10, which we've got to look forward to next time.
Yay!
So by now we know that the swords are the suit of thought and intellect, and in the 9 we see the most negative aspects of that taken to the extreme. The dark night of the soul is a concept that we sometimes hear about, and we can look at that from the point of view of psychology or spirituality. In a psychological sense, the term is used to describe a profound and intense existential crisis, often accompanied by feelings of despair, emptiness, and inner turmoil. This can be triggered by a significant life event, such as losing a loved one or the breakdown of a relationship. I think Pixie gave us a clue to that idea in her design of the bed covers, where we see the signs of the zodiac intersected with red roses, the symbol of love. These triggers can cause us to experience a loss of meaning, the feeling that we've got no purpose, and that the very basis of our lives is crumbling. The card also represents anxiety and worry. That's sometimes described as a feeling that there's something hanging over us, waiting to fall. In this sense, the swords refer to things that haven't happened yet, but just the thought of them is mentally crippling us. Rachel Pollack says the swords do not stick in her back, but hang in the black air above her. From a spiritual perspective, the term Dark Night of the Soul was coined by 16th century priest and mystic St. John of the Cross, who described the concept in his poem La Noche Oscura dell'Alma. It can refer to a crisis of faith and a feeling that we've strayed from whatever spiritual path we're on. We find the same idea across all religious traditions. In Buddhism, it's called falling into the pit of the void. Where psychology and spirituality meet is in the idea that this is only a part of our journey, and something that ultimately leads to personal growth. German philosopher Eckhart Tolle describes it as a kind of rebirth, in the sense that it can lead to a transformed state of consciousness. So that idea brings us back to the Death card, back at number 13 in the trumps. However, we don't see the conclusion to that until we get to the next card in the swords. Right now we're talking about the darkest moment of despair itself. Finally, another aspect of the card is how this situation can be self-created and exaggerated in our minds. This brings us back to the idea of how negative self-talk and catastrophizing can have a terrible effect on our mental well-being. In the Little Book of Tarot, Barbara Moore says that our minds are powerful things and thoughts can be as deadly as weapons. The Nine of Swords shows what happens when we turn those weapons on ourselves. Well, with all this talk of sorrow and despair, maybe the Thoth card can offer us some relief. Crowley says the symbol shows 9 swords of varying lengths, all striking downwards to a point. They are jagged and rusty, poison and blood drip from their blades. So it refers to this one as agony of mind, and talks about how the intellectual swords give way to uncontrollable instinct. I think he takes the whole concept one step further by relating it to someone actually losing their mind and falling into insanity. He says the swords no longer represent pure intellect so much as the automatic stirring of heartless passions. Consciousness has fallen into a realm unenlightened by reason. This is the world of the unconscious primitive instincts, of the psychopath, of the fanatic. Lord Milo Duquette talks about how you should probably avoid this card if you're feeling fragile from the night before. He says, oh dear, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. If you have a hangover, don't look at the Nine of Swords. You won't be ready to deal with this one. He goes on to talk about how it's not one of the more pleasant images from the Thoth deck. He says the whole scene induces dizziness. I can almost taste the drops of rusty blood dripping from the swords. The Sforza Marseille cards have introduced me to a genuinely new experience.
What's that then?
Being happy to see them. They can be as flowery and as swordy as they like this week. The Solar Busker gives us a possible explanation of what happened to the baby on the last card. There's also a fella helping the cherub to put his swords away, although I can't help but feel it would have been better for all involved if he'd bothered to get dressed first.
The efficiency of it is no longer the same as it was in the past, which should keep us in a justified distrust of those among the clients who provide nothing to the general store, either in labour or in specie.
Well, there you go. Even in the pit of despair, at least we can always rely on Etaila to give us one of the most stupefying things we've ever heard.
The Hermetic title for the Nine of Swords is Lord of Despair and Cruelty.
Well, I think we all had a pretty good idea that the title for this one wasn't going to be Lord of the Kittens and Lollipops. The title for the Thoth card is simply Cruelty, so everybody seems to be more or less on the same page here. I think we can connect that to the idea of feeling like the universe itself is being cruel to us. Those times when everyone and everything just seems to be against us in some way. It's easy to fall into despair at times like that, but when we look at it objectively, we can see that these are just the tides of our lives, the ebb and flow that brings us the good and the bad times. I keep coming back to the old Persian adage, this too shall pass.
The Nine of Swords corresponds to the Gemini zodiac sign and to the planet Mars.
So we're sticking with the Gemini twins, but now the planet of war has hoved into view. Gemini is the sign of communication, intellect and adaptability. Mars is the planet of action and assertiveness. When we put those two together, we get a potent blend of energy and the will to get out there and achieve. But, and I'm afraid there's always a but, this coupling can also result in mental restlessness, overthinking and times of mental disquiet. It connects to the Nine of Swords in the sense that if your mind's racing with obsessive thoughts or fears, then that can easily manifest itself as the anxiety and despair that defines this card. Mars in Gemini highlights the importance of finding a balance between intellectual stimulation and a peaceful mind.
You're gonna get the Temperance card out again, aren't you?
I certainly am. Nine of Swords notable people include Oscar-winning actor Morgan Freeman, Canadian singer Alanis Morissette, and English serial killer Peter Sutcliffe.
What? You're bringing up the Yorkshire Ripper?
Well, it is the Nine of Swords. We expecting Mary Poppins?
The Nine of Swords resides in the world of Yetzirah and sits at the 9th Sephira of Yesod on the Pillar of Mildness.
We're back at Yesod, the Sephira of Foundation, but now we're in the airy world of Yetzirah. Yesod is the Sephira of dreams, illusions, and the gateway between the conscious and the unconscious mind. Now, when we find Yesod in the intellectual world of Yetzirah, that can give us the kind of energy that we see on the Nine of Swords. The hidden parts of our psyche are where our deepest fears and unresolved issues reside. Yesod is considered to be the Sephira where the thoughts and emotions of the unconscious can manifest themselves in reality. So we can see a very clear connection between that idea and the image on the Waite-Sith card. The dreams become nightmares. According to Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, his numeration is Yesod, that is foundation, and signifieth a good understanding, a covenant, redemption and rest, and hath its influence through the order of angels, whom the Hebrews name cherubim, into the sphere of the moon, causing the increase and decrease of all things.
The Nine of Swords herb is valerian. This herb is often added to love spells to encourage less fighting between couples.
Jim Morrison is a crap singer.
Stop slamming the doors. But what does it all mean?
Well, I think the Nine of Swords is another one of those cards where sadly we're all too aware of what it means. Waite says death, failure, miscarriage, delay, deception, disappointment, despair. Now the important thing here is not to take a fatalistic view when this card appears. Many times have I found this delightful little gem sitting at the end of my Celtic cross spread and felt the doom and despair creeping in on me, but we don't want to turn it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. When Waite mentions things like death and miscarriage, he's talking about how the card illustrates the emotional effects of those concepts rather than making predictions. One thing we notice on the card is that the swords are all pointing off to the side. They're not pointing straight up like we see on the Ace or the Queen of Swords, where they stand for truth. This encourages us to look at the situation and see how much much of it is real and how much is the result of overthinking and catastrophizing. So if it does appear at the end of your reading, it can be telling you to keep a level head and not let fear overwhelm you. Rachel Pollack says, can we see a way out of such dreadful pain? Both Buddha and Christ pictured the world as a place of unending sorrow, yet both also said that tragedy remains always a half-truth, that the universe seen as a whole brings only joy and peace. So in that sense, we can view despair as only one part of a much bigger picture, and just another step along the journeys of our lives. She goes on to say, Nietzsche wrote of embracing existence so completely, with such total ecstatic honesty, that we would gladly repeat endlessly every moment of our lives, whatever the pain. Okay, so now we're quoting Nietzsche. That's how bad it's got.
Today it is more than ever necessary to say nothing. There are men meaner than the demons who accuse you of having spoken badly, so it is wise to be discreet. But what about...
There's a couple of different meanings for the reverse Nine of Swords. Firstly, it can indicate that despair has completely taken hold of us, and we're losing ourselves to pain and fear. Waite says reversed imprisonment, suspicion, doubt, reasonable fear, shame. So when he mentions reasonable fear, I think he's saying that whatever has triggered this state of mind is a genuine concern. However, our reaction to it could be making the situation worse than it truly is, hence the doubt, suspicion, etc. Rachel Pollack says, as with the card right side up, the reverse card deals with our reaction to something outside ourselves, but here it is oppression rather than tragedy. Another way to look at the upside down nine is from the perspective of seeing some light at the end of a very dark tunnel. The light of truth is shining in the distance, and we're just starting to see things as they really are. The bad situation remains, but we're gaining the strength and courage to face it with a sense of hope and optimism. So it's not all doom and gloom, it's just mostly doom and gloom.
In the reverse, this card tells you have walked away from a person who could have led you to your ruin. We got another email. Now's the time to invest in Turd Coin. It's gonna be huge.
The big takeaway from the Nine of Swords is feeling despair, but not allowing it to eat us up. Our minds can take a negative situation and make it 10 times worse by adding in all our doubts and fears. But it's important at times like this that we maintain our grip on reality. Often the very things that we're worried about turn out to be nothing more than mental abstractions. Mark Twain once said, I am an old man and have known a great many troubles, but most of them never happened.
That was a fun card, wasn't it? Can't wait for next week's offering. May the coming days bring you relief and peace of mind. Until next time.